Well, hello. Welcome to our live for this week. This week, we're going to talk a little bit about the seer gifting, understanding what the seer gifting is, how we step into it. And it should be a really fun discussion. I hope that you guys are ready for this. Well, I hope I'm ready for it as well. I'm pretty sure I am. This is something that I've been exploring for a number of years. I've always had a little bit of a seer gifting. It's really fun how the Lord has operated in different ways. I find myself going through seasons where certain types of revelation or certain giftings get emphasized for a few years, and it seems to be a primary function, and then things change and something else becomes a primary function, and the previous thing just kind of gets integrated into what I do and how I operate. And that was the seer realm. I had a period of a few years where I was constantly seeing things. I would have visionary experiences regularly while I was in worship, just in prayer and meditation. I would go into settings to minister, and I would see things in the spirit. I didn't actually see angels in the physical realm, but I would see them in the room. I would sense them. I would know them. I would see little flashes of light. And it was just such a common thing. I would have these seer experiences that would be so impactful for people when I ministered to them. And then a different season came, and those were still there, but less than what they were at that season. And that is pretty normal for most people, especially people that end up in more of a teacher or a leadership role, where they will find themselves going through different seasons so they can develop an understanding of that gifting, and it becomes a part of their toolkit and not their only tool in the toolkit. We definitely don't want to have only one tool in our toolkit, because we run into situations where all kinds of different things are needed. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of seer. Let's understand what the role of a seer is first. So the role of a seer. A number of years ago, a friend of mine, Jim Driscoll, was teaching on the seer, and he was a seer like few that I've ever met. But while he was teaching, he was talking about the original Hebrew for the word seer. Now, there's a couple different words for seer in the Hebrew, but one of the words, the Hebrew characters. Now, Hebrew was originally, before it became the kind of the form of letters that we see now printed, it was a pictographic language, meaning that instead of letters that would represent concepts or sounds, Roman characters that we use for English is more sounds, where more of the style of the Hebrew characters is more concepts. This was, it was pictures that would represent something. And the pictures, they each had kind of an essential element to them, but when you put them together, it would give you the understanding it was the word. So the pictures of the original ancient Hebrew, which you can find online, if you just Google ancient Hebrew pictograph, you'll find a number of charts that show you what they are. This particular word, it had a knife, it had a tent wall, and then the third letter was a tent peg. So the first letter was a picture of a knife. The second letter was a picture of a tent wall. And then the third picture was letter was the picture of a tent peg. And it comes with this understanding. A seer is one who cuts through the veil and anchors people on the other side. A knife is able to cut through. The tent wall is a separation between what's inside and what's outside. So this idea of veil. And then the tent peg is something that holds something fast. It secures it, it anchors it. This really helps us to understand what the role of a seer is, because a seer is someone who sees things on the other side, but through their explanation of what they see, their communication of what they see, they actually open up the veil and allow people to experience what they've experienced. It is not unusual to be in meetings, and I spent Actually, to be honest, it took me a couple years. I wish it would have taken me a little bit less time, where I was really concerned with how often somebody would say that they were sensing something and then everybody else started sensing it. I'm like, well, that kind of sounds like suggestion. And I wondered about that. And I realized that it's not so much the suggestion, because I've suggested things that I was not seeing and nothing happened. But when I see something and I communicate it, it's astounding how often people enter into that experience. And that's what happens when we experience something, when we see something in the spiritual realm, and then we communicate it. What we're doing is we're giving an agreement, we're giving a witness in the earth realm to something that's already true in the spirit, and the witness confirms it and makes it a reality for the people that are there. Doesn't make it more real, but it allows it to be experiential. That's probably better language than makes it a reality. It allows it to be experiential for the people that are there. They are able now to enter into that potential. And so the role of a seer is to see what's going on in another realm and to figure out, what do we do so that other people can have this encounter? In talking about prophetic gifting and different spiritual gifts, including the gift of tongues, Paul in 1 Corinthians 12, 13, and 14 makes the point that when we're gathered together, that our spiritual gifting, our spiritual experiences, whatever they may be, that they're supposed to be for the common good. So there are times when we're seeing things when we're by ourselves and it's merely for our own edification. But in meetings, sometimes what we're seeing is so that we can give words to it. We can give communication to it so that other people can experience the same thing that we're experiencing. And this is, it becomes a lot of fun. Now, not everything that somebody sees has to be communicated. There are times when we just see things because they're there. You can't see it because it's on the other side of the camera, but I can see behind the camera that I'm looking at right now, there's a set of 3 chairs. They're sitting there because we have 3 chairs that are set up in a row in our classroom. This is our classroom. It's also our studio. And so they're set up there. I'm seeing them not because I'm supposed to do anything, and me telling you that I'm seeing them doesn't change anything whatsoever. I'm just seeing them because they're there. But there are times when communicating what we see actually enters other people into that experience. I know many of you have had that experience. Maybe you didn't realize that that's what was going on. So we actually have to discern as seers, am I supposed to be saying something about this? Or is this just for my own edification, my own understanding? Is this for me? When we don't discern that and we talk about things that were not intended to be opening up an invitation for everybody else. So I'm seeing this and nobody else comes into that experience or comes into it. It actually ends up being the same thing like speaking in tongues without an interpretation. There's a timing issue that is there and realizing what it is that we're supposed to be doing. So the seer gift needs a lot of prayer. Every gift needs a lot of prayer. But we need to be asking the Lord, just because we're perceiving something, whether it be in the seer realm or in any other way of perceiving things, doesn't mean we're supposed to say anything. So we need to ask. We need to begin to talk to the Lord and figure out what it is that he's saying. If you want to go deeper on how to discern and understand how to respond to revelations, check out our e-course that's on our website on receiving and responding to prophecies. We'll put up a link in the description as well as in the comments so that you guys can find that. But it'll be very, very helpful for you. So that's a little bit about the function of the seer. But how does the seer gifting operate? I can remember having heard people talking about seeing different things. Oh, there's an angel over there, and I look over there and I'm not seeing anything. Now I can sense a presence, and when I look over there, I imagine in my mind an angel standing there, but I'm not seeing anything in the physical realm. And I wondered if I was actually a seer. And this is one of the keys. the seer realm can operate in a variety of different ways. Sometimes it's what we call an open-eyed vision, meaning we're seeing it in the physical realm while we're looking at something. I've had that happen a few different times. One time I was walking through the sanctuary before church and just praying for the different chairs and the people that God was going to be sending that day. And as I was interceding and praying, I saw probably, I don't know, 2-3 feet away from me. It was just hanging in the air. If I would have reached out, like I could have touched it. This ball, green ball, like a blue-green color that was just hanging in the air. It was a ball of light that was hanging there. And I knew that it was some type of a spiritual experience. I knew there was a spiritual reality to it, but it was in the physical realm. I could see it as well as I can see the camera that's in front of me, as well as I can see this microphone right here. It was right there. And it was so odd to me, meaning I just didn't expect it and I wasn't sure what to do with it. Like I kind of blinked my head and shook my head and I looked again and it was gone. Like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I should have paid more attention. Now, obviously, I asked the Lord, and that was really just an experience to build my faith and to tell me that I really do see things. Sometimes they manifest in the physical realm, but most often they're in the spiritual realm. So you're seeing something, but it's not necessarily physical. You know that it's not in the physical realm. Now, sometimes it's almost like it's in the imagination realm. This is where there's been some teachings that talk about this connection between imagination and revelation. There is a connection between imagination and revelation, but like we've talked about in other places, including the prophetic reformation teaching set, you have to be able to separate out the difference between imagination and revelation. Sometimes when we see things, it feels like we're imagining, but as we grow in our gifting, we're able to tell the difference between imagination and actually being shown something. But it's being seen in the mind's eye, or as Paul talks about, the eyes of our heart. We actually can see with the eyes of our heart. We can see with our spiritual eyes, and it's not physical at all. Our physical eyes aren't seeing anything, but we can see it. And usually what this looks like, or what this experience is like for me, is I will have a sense, like a knowing or an understanding that there's something there. And generally, like with angels, I can just sense, oh, there's an angel that's there. And if I think about it and I start praying about it, I can often picture what that angel looks like. And I'll picture like maybe what color of a sash it might be wearing, whether or not it has, weapons or no weapons. And I've been around enough times in doing seer exercises with other people that see differently to have confirmation again and again that this is real. Just because it's intangible does not mean it's not real. We have to understand that, because some people that see, they don't consider themselves seers because they haven't seen in the physical realm. And while that is one of the ways that we see, it is not the only way. Actually, it's a little bit more rare than the other way. The more common way is to see with the eyes of the heart, or the spiritual eyes that we have, where it's almost like we're imagining it, but it feels more real than the imagination. And we can tell the difference between the source, whether it's our own mind, our own soul that's giving that imagination, or whether it's coming from an external source and it's the Lord that's giving us understanding of what our spirit is sensing and picking up. Because our spirit and our soul, they are not the same. They are related. They are one. Our body, soul, and spirit, we are one person, and yet we are distinctly body, distinctly soul, and distinctly spirit. In each of those, they have their own ways of interacting with the world around us. And so what happens in something like that is our spirit is sensing something, and it's giving the communication of what it's sensing to our mind, and our mind is forming the picture of what our spirit is sensing. And that is very real, very tangible. I have so many stories. We could probably go the rest of the day just telling stories of times when this has happened. But one time I was actually teaching about angels. We were in a streams course and we were talking about angelic visitations. And one of the ladies that was there just was somebody that I knew really well. And in the aisleway, not too far from where she was sitting, I could sense this angel. And as soon as I sensed it, I could kind of see it in my mind's eye. This angel was just standing there. And so I had her stand up because I just felt prompted by the Lord. So I had her stand up and then kind of back up until she was standing exactly where that angel was. And pretty much as soon as she got there, the presence of the Lord just overwhelmed her. She ended up laying down on the floor, well, kind of falling, but she didn't get herself hurt, which is great. But she ended up on the floor. Oh, once she got up, she told me this a couple months later, that from that moment, that angel had been assigned to her, and it would show up in her house. It would show up when she was praying, when she was worshiping. Sometimes would leave feathers. Sometimes she would just feel its presence. Sometimes she would see it. It was something that the Lord had opened up an invitation, and he had wanted to assign this angelic presence to her to help her out. And it did. It helped her out, and it accomplished that assignment. So there's some very real, tangible things. Our friend Anna Werner, who's going to be here for our first prophetic conference in April, first prophetic conference in 2022, at least. In April, she has a story about having been praying for people, and she was praying for this guy that needed a new kneecap, and she could see in the spirit a kneecap hanging there. So she grabs the kneecap and puts it into his knee. And when she does, he's completely healed. It replaced the kneecap that was inside the skin, but it was a spiritual reality. And so sometimes with the seer realm, there's an interacting with that spiritual realm because the spiritual world is real. The Bible tells us the things that are visible are made from the things that are invisible. So the things that are the source are more tangible, more real, more important than the things that come from them. The spiritual is actually more real, more tangible than the physical. And once we get our minds reset to a biblical worldview and we start seeing the world as it is, instead of through the lens that our education and some of the deception that is so prevalent in this scientific age that we live in, or the age of reason, as some have called it, where reason has become God over and above the reality that we live in, these things become easier and easier to understand. So we need to recognize that the spiritual world is real. And those kinds of interactions, they have very real results when we agree with them. And so it comes back into this idea of the seer opening up the veil and anchoring people into the reality. When those things happen, the seer saw the kneecap and put it there, and it awakened it. It opened it up. That physical action in responding to what was seen in the spirit allowed the potential that was being made available to become reality. And there's that understanding of agreement in the way that God has created the world to work, that there's an agreement. It's the power of prayer. It's not that God needs our prayer to do things, but he uses our prayers as an agreement because we've been given authority in this realm. So he communicates potential in his realm. We agree with it in our realm, and things get established and things happen. It also is helpful. That understanding becomes so essential to recognizing when it's beneficial and when it's not beneficial, because there's something that's come into the prophetic movement that is really dangerous. And it has touched some areas of the seer realm. And it's this idea that we come up with something and we communicate it as if we're prophesying. We call it prophecy, and then it causes things to happen. That is much closer to divination and witchcraft than it is anything that is found in scripture about the reality of God. We don't come up with our own will. We see what God is doing and we agree with him. We ask God to accomplish what we want, but our commands are always because it's something that's already true in the heart of God, in the will of God, and we're enforcing what he is saying, not trying to make our own will come to pass. And just saying, well, I see this when we don't see it, trying to make it real, that's called lying. That's not called prophesying. And so be careful of that arena, because I've actually had friends that have tried to explain to me how you just imagine things and then call it revelation and it makes it real and people will believe it. Well, yeah, I mean, people will believe it because they think that you're telling the truth. But the problem is that is the definition of lying. That is deception. And we, as ones that minister and that are communicating for the Lord, of all people, should have a higher requirement to stay to a standard of truth and integrity. And so avoid that. And when you see that, just run, because it is dangerous. Empty promises do not profit anyone. Jeremiah talked about that, talking about the false prophets of his day. And things have not changed too terribly much. The same issues that we've always faced, we're facing and we will face in the next generation and the next generation until he comes back, which is why we've been given this beautiful understanding and knowledge of the history of the church and the history of scripture, so that we can learn from those things and find ourselves walking in the right path instead of the wrong path. So you have understanding the purpose of the seer, to be able to anchor people into the potential and the reality that God is revealing from spirit. When we give it communication, when we give it agreement, it causes things to happen, realizing that sometimes we're seeing in the physical realm, sometimes we're seeing in the spiritual realm, and it almost feels like the mind's eye, almost like the imagination, and yet different than the imagination. And learning that difference, sometimes it's really hard to tell at first, but the principle of Hebrews 5:14 is important to remember when it comes to the things of the Spirit. That is, those who are mature, that is, those who by reason of use have their senses exercised or trained, another translation says, to discern good from evil. So as we exercise, as we use our spiritual senses, we grow in our capacity to discern. So when you're first stepping out into the seer realm, start with talking to people that are friends that can help you understand and can give you feedback. Well, what are you seeing? Well, I'm seeing this. What are you seeing? Let's test it out. Let's find out if it's real. And you develop that history of learning to know the difference between the reality of what God is showing and when you're just trying to make something happen, or you want something so badly that you're picturing it or that you're visualizing it, which is a huge difference. Yeah, somebody just said trying to make lies truth has no fear of the Lord. That is true. That's one of the things why I didn't even realize that was possible for so long, because I had no grid that somebody would ever do that, just make something up and call it prophesying. And yet I've not only seen it, I've actually heard people teach that is how you do it, which is just scary. It is scary. So how do you grow in your seer gifting? Well, what I was just talking about, that practice thing, a practice thing is so key. Finding a community of people where you can test, you can practice. I think I'm seeing something. Well, what do you think you're seeing? Well, this is what it is. Well, okay, I'm not sensing anything, but let's try it. Let's see if anything happens. How do we agree with that? Well, I sense an angel over there. Well, what is it doing? Well, it's not doing anything. Well, let's just go stand there and see if there's any difference. One of the things I've seen a number of times is when that happens and there actually is an angel there, it's usually a different temperature where the angel is. Excuse me. It will often, like, there'll be some type of manifestation in the physical. I've had it where it was like 5 or 10 degrees warmer in this little sphere, 2 to 3 feet, 4 feet sometimes wide sphere. People step into it and they feel the difference. You can wave your hand and you feel the difference when it's normal, no, whoa, that's warm, and then normal again. It actually will shift that. Sometimes it's just, people can't stand. I've done impartation a couple different times where I've recognized, oh, there's an angel right there. Just have people stand there. And then when they fall down, we drag them out and have the next person stand there and just let God do the impartation, rather than it being through our own activity, just agreeing with what heaven is doing. And that really is the main thing about the seer. The purpose of the seer is to help us agree with what heaven is doing. God loves to reveal himself. He loves to show himself to us and through us, and we get to be a part of it. So one of the questions that comes up, or one of the comments that sometimes comes up, is this idea of seer being kind of the most important gifting. And it is not the most important gifting. What the most important gifting is always is whatever is the most beneficial for the people that are there in the moment. If somebody is dealing with sickness and you're seeing something that has no healing virtue in it, that's not the most helpful for that person. The most helpful for that person is the gift of healing. They need the gift of healing, not the gift of seeing. Now, if your seeing is going to bring physical healing, then obviously now there's the benefit. So the most important one is the one that's the most beneficial for the people that are there. It's the point, like I said earlier, 1 Corinthians 12, 13, and 14. It's a major principle to even discern when spiritual activity is from the Lord, or when we're just stepping into something in our own in our own gifting that's not necessarily the Lord that's causing something to happen. Is how beneficial, how loving it is for the people that are there. So is it beneficial? Is it bringing help to those that are there? That's a key understanding. And so any way that we hear God is important if it's actually God that we're hearing. So if we're seeing, then seeing is important because we're recognizing and responding to God. But if we're hearing, that's just as important. Or if we are just knowing something or understanding something, or an angel comes and tells us what is going on, all of these are just different ways of receiving revelation. And the most important one is the one that God is calling you to in the moment that you're in. So learn to recognize where God is calling you and focus in on that. But just because that's what he's called you to doesn't mean that it's the most important for everybody. It tends to have some fun stories. It's like the gift of faith on the one side, and then the gift of seeing on the other side. They tend to have these astounding stories that impress people, but it's not essential to have a great story that impresses people. What the question is it helpful to people? And so that's key. So somebody that sees, or somebody that hears, or somebody that smells, or somebody that tastes, all of the senses, they're all important. Depends on what God is highlighting. That's the one that is the most important. And here's the other one tying into that is sometimes when people teach about the seer realm, they just lump all the different ways, anything other than hearing, as part of the seer gifting. It's not that that's not necessarily bad. It's just unhelpful. The seer is just a descriptive term of someone that sees more, where someone that is more on the prophetic side is somebody that hears more. Seers is just one of the functions under the prophetic umbrella. So not all prophets are seers, but all seers are prophets. So understanding that. So it's a subcategory under the larger category of prophecy, revelation. It's just one of the ways that are available. But it just because if somebody is not seeing and they're hearing, that doesn't make them a seer. And if somebody is not seeing but they're tasting, that doesn't make them a seer. And I mean, it's kind of weird to call somebody a taster. I get it. That sounds like something that happens in a restaurant rather than something that happens in the church. Sometimes it's easier just to say God has revealed something. We don't have to have labels for everything. It's not about having the right label. It's about having the right function. So don't get so caught up in what to call it. It doesn't really matter as long as we're responding to God's invitation. What matters is, are we responding to God, and are we loving people? That's what's essential. Everything else is just optional. So that is another piece that comes with a seer. So lots of ideas. So hopefully some helpful points about the seer realm. I'm going to take a look at some of the comments that we have here on the different channels that we are posting this on, and see if there's some good questions maybe that we can discuss. Somebody mentioned James Gall has some great books. He does have some great books. His book on the seer is one of the better books about the seer gifting. He goes through a couple of the different Greek words that is translated as revelation, prophecy, vision, seeing, and talks about what we can learn about the different functions of the seer from those different words. I really appreciated that book, found it encouraging. All right, let's see. Arthur, I'm a little gun shy in saying I'm a seer. Sounds a bit strange. Isn't it like titles? Well, it could be a title if it's used in that way, or it could just be a description. It could just be saying, I tend to see more things. So it really depends on how it's being used. If you need people to call you Seer Arthur, now that's really weird. That does become a title. It's more a description. Hey, hey, I'm John and I prophesy, or hey, I'm John and I'm a seer, or I see things. Those are functional terms rather than title words. So how it's being used is really essential. So Per asked, how can we enjoy seeing in the spirit more if we have a lot of attacks or things like that? Ask for justice. I'm trying to remember what it was that started this conversation. I'm pretty sure it was during impartation. But John Paul, John Paul was praying for me, and he recognized that I'd had some demonic visitations. I cannot remember if I mentioned that to him or if he just knew it by revelation. I can't remember. Either way, here's the important piece. He told me, he goes, you know what the justice for demonic visitations is the angelic visitations. Start asking the Lord to bring you the angelic visitations. If you have seen in the spirit and what you've seen has been negative, the enemy is trying to attack the seer gifting. Begin to ask God for justice, and that justice comes with the ability to see the good. When we have a clean prophetic gifting, we can see both the good and the bad. If we're only seeing good and we're not seeing anything of the enemy, we're not seeing everything that's out there. So there's something that's hindering a part of our ability to see. If we're only seeing the bad and we're not seeing the good, there's something wrong with our gifting. If we're seeing more bad than we are good, there's something wrong with our gifting, because there's twice as many angels as there are demons. And so God never stops acting. That's the right way of saying it. I got to find the right English for the concept I'm trying to communicate. God never stops acting. He's always doing something. And so we can see it and recognize it, beginning to ask for our eyes to be opened. And when the enemy has afflicted our gift by putting things in front of us, causing us to see things that were bad, and he loves to do that, especially to ones that are just starting in their gifting, or to children that have a gifting. He'll cause them to see negative things with the intent that they would make inner vows to shut down their seeing. And this will also be something for some of you. If you, at a different season previously in your life, you used to see, but you saw negative things. Maybe you saw demonic things. Maybe you had nightmares. You had experiences of sensing and experiencing evil, and it has stopped, and you're not experiencing and seeing good to the extent that you experienced that evil. it is possible that you made an inner vow. You might have said at some point, I don't want to see, I don't want to have this gifting. I know people that I've ministered to that saw things that happened, saw somebody that was going to pass away before they passed away. It's like, I don't want to know what's going to happen in the future. And they stopped knowing what was going to happen. They actually shut down their gifting. If that is you, seeing, gifting, knowing, whatever realm, begin to ask God to forgive you. Repent for having judged the gift. God, you gave me a gift and you only give good gifts. The enemy tried to use it for evil, but you intended it for good. I want the good that you intended. Lord, forgive me for vowing to never see. Forgive me for my judgment that this was too much. It was too heavy. I don't want it. I can't handle it. Lord, forgive me for not receiving the gift that you've given me. I change my mind right now, and I receive every gift that you have for me. Lord, would you open my eyes to see again? Would you let me hear again, but only let me hear what you want me to hear? I consecrate my gift to you, for you and you alone, for your purposes and no one else's. And I'm asking you would cleanse my gift from any defilement that the enemy has tried to put on it, in the name of Jesus. Now, that prayer can change your life. That's a great question, Per. Thank you. So somebody was asking if there are any books to help in the seer realm. We mentioned the Seer by James Gall, a really good book. And actually, I'll give you another one. There's the seer realm, and in all of the visual revelations that God gives, they're all interrelated. And so often things that happen in the seer realm need to be interpreted. I remember I've seen a couple different times, like a tree growing in the middle of a sanctuary. It wasn't because there was actually a tree there, but it was representing of the kind of fruit that the leadership was producing, the growth that God was causing for that particular environment. There's metaphor often in the seer realm. Seeing somebody with a banana growing out of their head. I use that example a lot when I'm teaching about the seer realm. It's just one of those pictures that's never left me. But there's metaphor that's there. There's metaphor that's there, can be understood. And so, because that, I would suggest dream elements. Because when you begin to understand dream metaphor, it's the same metaphor that's used in seer experiences and visionary experiences. If they need to be understood, if there's a metaphor there, it's the same language. So going to the Dream Elements book and beginning to understand how God uses metaphor, that'll be really helpful. So that would be another explanation, another resource for you. Okay, let's see. JDAM, thank God for this channel. Well, thank you. May the Lord continue to release his blessing and call the people that need to hear and have a heart for purity and want to hear God better. That's what we are here for. Okay, let's see. Recently in worship at a church, I saw a jousting lance come smashing through the wall. A jousting lance. Now that's interesting. Because again, we're back into the metaphor. So you'll see things like this. I mean, this it's not what we would often call a dream, because the person wasn't asleep. They were in worship. They were awake, but they were seeing something that's metaphorical. And this is a very common aspect of the seer gift. Sometimes you just see stuff that's literally there, angels. Sometimes you see stuff in metaphorical examples, like going up into a heavenly encounter and seeing a room full of body parts. It's a metaphorical experience that's communicating a reality that all of the potential for healings and miracles that'll ever be needed is available in God's heart and in God's resources. So, a jousting lance can represent about some type of conflict. But this idea that the concept of knights, there used to be a nobility, a right and a wrong way of doing it. And so, boy, I'm not quite sure exactly what to do with that. There's something there, but I'm not sure exactly how to interpret that one right now. Maybe I'll have to if I get anything else in prayer, I'll try to make a comment. but sometimes they will, sometimes they just show, sometimes I don't get the right interpretation. That's the easy way of saying it. Okay. So somebody asks, is that what they call manifestation? So I think that was at the point where I was talking about how things can happen, where you see something in the spirit, but then when you agree with what's going on in the spirit, then something happens in the physical realm. That is exactly the definition of a manifestation. There's a manifestation that is released. Things manifest in the physical realm. So we had a lot of good discussion. I'm seeing a couple comments about needing to go back and re-listen to some of this. We hit a lot of different aspects of the seer realm. I think this is going to be really helpful for you. If you're finding it helpful, share it. Let people know about this, because there's a lot of people that are seeing things and they don't understand what is going on with them. And this can at least help them start down the journey. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I know some of you are tuning in on Facebook. It makes it easier to share on Facebook, but go to our YouTube channel. You can subscribe to the channel. And if you hit that little bell icon, you'll get notifications whenever we go live. We go live. We try to do it on a regular basis, and we'll do a little bit of teaching like this. And then other times we will do dream interpretation. And so we want you to know when we do that, and all the other content that we put out on a regular basis. We are trying to make sure that we get what you need to help you grow in your capacity to hear God. I've been sharing this recently, but a few years ago, I was in Hong Kong, and I was with a pastor there that we've been working out with for a number of years. And he was introducing me to an internationally known leader, somebody I've looked up to for a very long time. And he introduced me like this. He goes, "Hey, this is John Thomas. He's with Streams Ministries. He gives the body of Christ hearing aids." And I just thought, like, that is one of the best descriptions of what we do that I've ever heard. Like, that is our heart. We want to give hearing aids to the body of Christ. We want to help people to hear God better. So if you know somebody that needs to hear God better, if you want to grow in hearing God better, check out our website. We've got a lot of resources. We put out blogs, we put out videos, we have courses. We have courses that were written and taught by John Paul, courses that I've written and taught. We've got Streams Academy for people that want to do a deep dive into revelatory training. I put together all the things that I learned from John Paul through the courses and through my interaction, the things that I've studied and I've learned, and put it together in the format that I would use if I was going to be mentoring someone in a revelatory calling, revelatory gifting. How would I do it? That's what Streams Academy is. And if you haven't looked into that, check it out, streamstraining.com. But we want to be a resource. We want to help people, and we want as many people as possible to know about what we have available. So if you can help us get the word out there, that would be astounding. Guys, we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for joining us. Really, I love doing these broadcasts and getting to interact with some of your questions. Bless you guys. Take care.